What is your full name?
My full name is Gordon Cecil McGavin.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in a little town in Nevada called Alamo on January 29, 1925.
And how old are you right now?
I'm just a couple of weeks short of reaching my 92nd year.
What was your full rank by the time you left the armed services?
When I left from active duty during World War II, I was a staff sergeant.
And what branch were you in during the Second World War?
I was in what was then called the Army Air Corps.
And what were your specific units that you were a part of?
I was in the 486 Bomb Group, an 835th Bomb Squadron, part of the 8th Air Force stationed in England.
And what was your specific role?
I was a waist gunner.
On what kind of plane?
We flew B-17s.
So I want to backtrack a little bit. You said you were born in Alamo, Nevada. Did you grow up there as well?
No, we were just there a short time. My dad was a seminary teacher in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church had sent him there, and shortly after that he was transferred somewhere else.
Where?
We ended up for a while in Beaver, Utah, and then in Spanish Fork, Utah. And then in the late 1930s, we moved to Salt Lake City.
So where did you primarily grow up?
In Salt Lake City.
Talk to me about the kind of things that you would do for fun as a small child.
Oh, that's kind of hard. I do remember that my grandparents had a farm in Idaho, and at the end of each school year, we would go up there, and I would stay for the whole summer. And then when school started, my parents would come and get me. My uncle was the scoutmaster. I got a lot of the merit badges for scouting, the outdoor types, as a result of my uncle being the scoutmaster.
What kind of games would you play, though?
I don't recall any particular games as a team. It was just fun being on the farm and that outdoor type of life.
And your father's occupation was primarily what?
He was a teacher, but he was teaching in the church seminary system. And later on, he started working for the post office later in life.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a brother and two sisters.
Did your brother also serve?
He was in the reserves for a while. I don't recall that he had any active duty, but he was in the reserves for a number of years.
Talk to me about what it was like to grow up during the Great Depression.
Well, I remember that was a very difficult time for my parents. They were raising 4 children in the midst of the Depression. Money was tight. I don't recall any particular privations that we suffered as a result of it. We always seemed to have plenty, but it was a very difficult economic time for people at that time raising families.
Are there any specific instances that made you realize that there was a Great Depression going on?
No. I recall back in the mid 1930s, my dad took me with him when he went back to Detroit to pick up a car. We bought a car, we went back to Detroit to pick it up, and we drove it home. And I don't recall any particular situation that was particularly bad or unpleasant.
Now, growing up, what were your hobbies and interests?
I had a stamp collection. I liked to collect stamps. I also liked to make model airplanes. And you'd make a model airplane and hopefully it would fly. And I made quite a few model airplanes.
Were you always interested in flying?
Not particularly. I don't know how I ended up in the Air Corps rather than the infantry, but I went to basic training in Fresno, California, and from there I was just assigned to various places for particular training, and then I ended up on a B-17 crew.
What high school did you go to? What high school did you go to?
I went to East High in Salt Lake.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1942.
Were you more of an academic or athletic type?
Academic. I didn't participate in athletics.
What kind of things did you like to study?
I like languages. I took a year or so of German in high school, and in junior high I had some Spanish. And then when I got up to the U, I had some French.
When you and your buddies would get together in your teenage years, what kind of things would you guys do for fun?
We'd play baseball. We'd just play out in the street. When a car came along, we'd get off the street and then we'd be back on the street hitting the ball.
Is there anything special you guys would do on Halloween?
Well, I lived in Spanish Fork in my younger days, and there were a lot of outhouses, and we would go tip over the outhouses. This was a particular popular fad at the time. Not much to really be proud of, but we did that as much as anything.
Any other activities on Halloween?
I don't think so. Nothing that I can recall.
Now, growing up, were you aware of what was happening over in Europe with the Nazi Empire or what Japan was doing to China?
No, I was pretty young for that. I wasn't particularly aware of it. The event that got me aware of what was happening was when Pearl Harbor happened.
Talk to me about how you found out about the attack.
Well, it was just a big shock. Everybody was surprised and shocked at it. And it wasn't surprising that a declaration of war was made as a result of that. And that drew us into World War II.
But how did you hear about the attack?
By radio. That was about all that was available. Radio and newspapers. And Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the president then, would periodically be on the radio with just kind of a heart-to-heart discussion with the public over matters of public concern.
What were your thoughts of FDR?
I didn't have any political thoughts at the time. He died the year I was discharged from the Army, and so I was away for a good part of my adult life at the time. So I didn't really have much reaction or feeling or understanding about him.
Before the war, did you have any idea on what you wanted to become when you grew up?
No, I didn't.
You weren't leaning towards anything?
Well, I recall, I think I got a B in chemistry in high school, so I thought, I'll be a chemical engineer. And I had a little taste of engineering, and that decided me I didn't want to be an engineer.
And how important was the Mormon church growing up?
It was during my formative years, and during the time I was in the service, I had very little contact with the church. The church wasn't very big in numbers in those days, and I just didn't have much contact with the church. But after I got home, I knew I wanted to go on a mission for the church, and that's what I did.
How big was the church when you were growing up?
The membership was under a million. It only hit a million in the year 1947.
And what's it at now?
It's something over 15 million at the present time.
What were the first few jobs you had growing up?
I remember working in a mill. It was a woolen mill, and I don't remember much about it. I do remember seeing a sign that mentioned the minimum wage. And the minimum wage was 75 cents an hour. And when I saw that, I thought, am I really making 75 cents an hour? I was surprised that I was making that much.
Because that was a lot of money?
It was to me at that time.
So take me through what happens after Pearl Harbor. Did you want to get into the war?
No, I was only 16 at the time. But when I turned 18, I had to register for the draft, and about 2 months after I turned 18, I received a notice from the draft board that I was being drafted into the Army.
What were your thoughts about that?
I was okay. I was okay with that. I didn't have any desire not to do it. I didn't have any desire to go to Canada. Nobody did that in those days. At least, nobody did it to avoid the draft. There were Americans who went to Canada because they were too young for the U.S. Army Air Corps, as it was at the time. And they went to Canada to enlist in the Canadian Air Force. And a lot of them ended up in England in the Royal Air Force. And at one point, they were all transferred over to the American Air Force.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, what do you remember about the feelings of the people around you?
I don't particularly remember anything about that. As I say, I was only
But was there
16 at the time.
was there a lot of patriotism?
Very much so. Very much so.
And did you listen to FDR's declaration of war speech the following day?
I don't remember that I did. I don't remember.
What kind of things would you listen to on the radio?
Oh, they had programs like Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. There's another program that I remember that was called Pretty Kitty Kelly. And these are radio programs because that's all we had in those days.
So after you got drafted, take me through what happens.
I went to basic training in Fresno, California in July and August, and that was pretty hot in Fresno at that time of the year. And then they called me in and they said there was a program that was called the Army Specialized Training Program that was set up to train engineers and linguists. And they sent me back to the University of Illinois, where I spent 1 quarter. But they wanted to put me in engineering, and I had already decided I didn't want that. So I was only there for 1 quarter. Then I went to an armament school near Denver, Colorado. After that, I went to a gunnery school in Texas. Then I was put on a B-17 crew. We went through overseas training in South Dakota, and then we flew our own B-17 to England, going up through Canada, landing in Iceland, and then going on to England.
Take me through basic training. What kind of things did you guys have to do?
Physical training. We'd be out in the field doing push-ups and running and obstacle course. We went through, I don't know, 2 months of that or so. I don't recall the exact length of time, but it was just trying to get us into shape physically, and that was kind of tough. In Fresno in July and August, they always had an ambulance on standby in case anybody passed out. We did a lot of running, just physical training to get us out of that civilian mode.
Did it work?
Yeah, it worked. Yeah.
Take me through a typical day. You wake up early in the morning, then what?
Then you have breakfast. I don't remember much beyond the physical training part of it. I don't recall that we had any training with weapons. At some point we would have had to have done that. But of course, being on a B-17 crew, I went through that in Gunnery School in Texas, where we'd fly out over the water and shoot at ground targets.
Now, did you originally want to become a pilot?
Yes, I did. I thought I'd try to, so I even applied for pilot training. But it depended on the needs at that particular time. And at the time I took the test, there wasn't a great need for pilots, so the standards were higher, and I didn't get qualified for pilot training. So I just went back to, well, it was after that that I was assigned to a B-17 crew.
Take me through armament school.
I don't remember a lot about it, except that I was also the armorer gunner on our crew.
Meaning what?
After a plane is airborne, the bombs have to be armed. And each one of them has a pin in the tail that if that pin isn't removed, it won't detonate. So after we were airborne, I took all the pins out of them to arm the bombs. And even then, sometimes the bomb wouldn't detonate. And that's what we called a dud. And just recently in the paper I read where in some city in Germany they came across another bomb from World War II that was buried somewhere that just hadn't detonated.
And did you also go to gunnery school?
Yes.
What do they teach you at gunnery school?
Oh, using primarily a 50 caliber machine gun, but we also had training with simulated turrets with shotguns, and we'd go out on a skeet range and shoot at these clay pigeons for that particular type of training.
And you didn't finish talking to me about armament school. What did they teach you at armament school?
I don't remember all that much about it, except that I was the one who was responsible for arming the bombs after we were airborne.
Got it. Now, when you were training stateside, did the government show you guys any propaganda or things to get you motivated?
Not that I recall in the military, but out in the public there were signs of government intervention. One thing, one slogan that was said was, "A slip of the lip can sink a ship," about not discussing secrets. So if you're working at a war plant, don't discuss what's going on, and be careful about who you're talking to.
Did you receive any specialized training?
This wasn't particularly specialized. It was specific for what my particular duties were like going through armament school and going through gunnery school. And
where did you get linked up with your crew?
as I recall, it was at a base in South Dakota where we went through our overseas training. I think that's where our crew was formed.
What do they teach you when it comes to overseas training?
I don't even recall very much about that. I just don't remember those details.
Talk to me about meeting your crew for the first time.
I don't remember that either.
Do you remember any of their names on the crew?
Oh yes, I remember just about all of them.
Tell me.
William Beard was our pilot. Merle Turner from Missouri was our co-pilot. And as soon as we got to England, he got sick, so they shipped him home. Art Miller was our bombardier. Walter Early was our navigator. Vincent Fierro was our flight engineer. Frank Coppola, I think he was a gunner. Bob Bremer from Philadelphia was the radio operator. Lawrence Mitchell was one of the gunners. That's about all I remember.
And by the time you were flying B-17s, you were responsible for both waist turrets?
When we first went over, we had a 10-man crew, so there was a gunner on each side. And then they dropped the one gunner, making it a 9-man crew, and the one gunner manned both sides of the airplane.
Why'd they drop it?
That cut the potential losses by 10%. And a lot of B-17s got shot out of the air.
Talk to me about how you guys got from South Dakota over to England.
I remember we stopped in Labrador, which is up near Canada. Then we flew to Iceland. Then we flew on to England from there.
And talk to me about the first time you flew in an airplane.
I don't have any recollection of the first time I flew in an airplane. It was certainly a B-17 though. And even when we weren't flying combat missions, we'd often fly training missions in England. And we'd fly up to Scotland and back, whatever. We didn't suffer a great deal of damage. We always came back with holes in the plane. On one mission we had our oxygen system shut out. And we had what was called a walk-around bottle, which is a metal container about this size that had about 30 minutes of oxygen in it. So we had 30 minutes to get down to where there was oxygen.
By the time you got to England, when was it? What month and what year?
It was October of 1944. That was several months after D-Day. And we just started flying missions.
Talk to
after
me
that.
about what it was like before your very first mission. What kind of things were you thinking about?
I don't know that I was thinking about anything seriously. I was probably too young to really be afraid. We were always subject to being fired upon from anti-aircraft fire. There's always flak that you could see, because when that shell detonated, it was just a big black puff of smoke. And you could see these everywhere you looked out the window. I'd just stand at the window and watch it. I wasn't afraid of anything. I was probably just too young to realize how serious that was.
Where was your first mission to?
I don't remember that. I had a diary once that got lost, and I tried to get a copy of the missions that I flew, and I was unable to do so. I don't even remember all the missions that that is where we went. I do recall we went to Hamburg. We had a couple of missions to Berlin, and the other ones I just don't remember.
Were all your missions in Germany?
I had 19 in Germany, and ironically, the last one was to France, because there was still some German resistance, and for some reason that I don't remember, I didn't fly with my own crew. But that mission didn't get on my record as a result of not flying with my crew. But I was on my last mission to France.
Why were you only able to complete 20 missions? Did the war end before your tour?
They wouldn't let us fly anymore when the war ended.
No, but if you got there in October of 44, from October to May of 45, that's how long it took to do 20 missions?
Yes.
How often would you guys go up?
Well, there are 4 squadrons in a bomb group, and the ideal situation was to be able to fly 3 of them a day, and then every 4th day you would fly, but it was more irregular than that. It'd depend on how much damage the plane sustained and how long it would take to get them repaired as to whether they were flyable.
Talk to me about what it was like to experience Flack.
It was really quite fascinating to watch. You'd see these black bursts, black cloud of, well, just the explosive, and that would just throw shrapnel everywhere, or flak, as we called it. And that knocked down a lot of airplanes, knocking out an engine, or sometimes starting a fire on the plane, knocking a wing off, or damaging the tail to where it was unflyable.
Did your crew sustain any casualties?
No, we didn't. We were very lucky that way. And in my 20 missions that I flew, I never did see an enemy fighter.
Not one.
Never did see one.
So your biggest enemy was the anti-aircraft guns.
Anti-aircraft was our big enemy.
What kind of load were these B-17s taking?
It depended on the mission. They could carry 2,000-pound bombs, or they could carry smaller ones, or they could carry incendiary bombs if they wanted just to start a fire. But it just depend on the particular target.
Did it ever affect any of the guys dropping these bombs?
No, none of them showed any ill effects from it. That just didn't happen.
Were there times that you saw planes around you going down?
I saw two going down.
Can you describe those two instances to me, please?
One of them had the left wing shot off. It was just following in wing over wing over wing. And the other one was going down in just a slow circle. Just a slow circle. Just getting closer on every turn. It just ultimately crashed. Probably took the crew with it.
What was that like for you to see?
It was almost like this can't be happening. But it happened a lot. And we just kept dropping bombs and bombs and bombs. There could be hundreds of planes in the flight stream, in the bomb stream, each carrying several thousand pounds of bombs.
And how long would a typical mission last?
Oh, it could be 10 or 12 hours, flying there and back. On one mission, we ran into a strong headwind. We didn't have enough gas to make it, so we landed at a fighter base in Belgium and spent the night there, and then got back home the next day.
Talk to me about some of your most memorable experiences flying combat missions.
Well, there wasn't much that I would call memorable. It was a very impersonal way of carrying out a war because we'd fly over, invariably there was cloud cover, and even when there wasn't, they'd set off smoke pots that create smoke coverage to where you couldn't even see the ground. So we couldn't actually see what we did until later when pictures were taken and some assessment was made of the damage that was done. But it was just a very impersonal way of conducting a war. You fly in, drop your bombs, and fly home. Except if you get shot down.
And out of your 20 missions, you saw 2 planes go down.
Yeah.
Did you ever think you might not make it? Were there any instances?
No, I never had that thought. I guess I was probably just too young to realize the seriousness of what we were doing and the potential hazard and danger of not coming back, but it just didn't bother me.
What would you say was one of your most frightening experiences overseas?
I can't really recall anything that I would call a frightening experience. I can't think of anything.
Did you have any unusual experiences? Unusual experiences?
Oh, the most unusual was that one where we had the oxygen system shot out and we had to rely upon another source for oxygen until we could get down to about 10,000 feet. We'd be flying at 30 and 32,000 feet.
How heavy was the flak on your missions?
How did I what?
How heavy was the flak?
It was quite heavy. You'd see these black bursts of flak just everywhere out there. You look out the window and you could just see it, those shells detonating everywhere.
What did it sound like?
You couldn't hear it. You could just see it.
Did it ever rock the plane?
Yeah, you could feel that a bit, and we got a lot of holes in the plane from flak. The most serious being that occasion when the oxygen system was shot out.
Now, the waist gunner, did you guys have some glass, or was it a completely open window?
Oh no, it was covered. It was plexiglass.
Did you ever have reason to use your .50 caliber?
No. On each mission, we'd test fire them going over the channel, just to make sure they were working. But never did even fire them on any of the missions.
It's probably a good thing.
That was a good thing.
Did you see the war have any mental effect on anyone?
No. No, that war was quite different from the present wars that we're having when you have when you have people coming back from combat with mental issues and traumatic syndrome issues and all of that. That just didn't seem to happen in World War II.
When you guys were on your missions, you said it'd be 10 to 12 hours. What kind of things are you guys doing to occupy yourselves?
Just standing there watching out the window. There wasn't much you could do to occupy yourself with. You were supposed to be on duty, on guard, just watching.
What was it like? Did you ever see the destruction done to all the cities?
Not at the time.
But later on, what was that like for you to see?
A few years later, I was in Europe, and I got to go into Germany, and when it was still mostly a pile of rubble. The buildings were just skeletons, rubble all over the streets. But at least the rubble had been cleaned up a bit, and about every 100 yards there'd be a neatly stacked pile of rubble waiting to be carried off somewhere.
How'd that make you feel, seeing all it?
Well, it just made us realize what we had accomplished with the bombings. We didn't actually see it at the time because of the altitude and due to cloud coverage. Invariably there was cloud coverage and you can't even see the ground.
When you guys were back at the base, what kind of things would you do to occupy yourself in your free time?
Oh, a lot of them played pinochle.
What's that?
It's a card game. And when they weren't flying, they usually could get leave.
Did you ever get leave?
Yeah, we'd go into London, something like that.
Was London still being attacked by those rockets?
Absolutely.
Talk to me about that.
It was just constantly being attacked, and they were just randomly fired and set for wherever they had hit. And sometimes the RAF would go up to try to shoot them down. On one occasion, one of them had been damaged that was near our airfield. And it was actually circling the airfield, kind of out of control. And every time it went around the circle, it got lower and lower and lower to the ground. And finally, it just crashed in some field and exploded. But they were just randomly fired to do whatever damage they could.
Did you ever listen to Axis Sally?
No.
Do you know who that is?
Yeah. Yeah, we never got any of that.
Did you have any interaction with Kilroy was here?
Oh, we saw those figures all the time. There was a GI named Bill Malden, who was an artist. And these little Kilroy signs were all over, and he drew a lot of cartoons. There was a magazine that, I don't know, I guess, I don't know if it was a weekly or what it was, but he would come out with just news about what was happening in the war.
What was the name of your plane?
I don't recall if we even had a name for it.
Really?
I don't think we did.
And at the time that you were flying, what was the minimum number of missions?
The usual tour of duty was 25 missions. And then you could get sent home. And after our 20th one, the war ended and we came home.
How did you hear about the war ending?
Oh, it was big news. It was on the radio, in the newspapers, and in the military magazines that were published.
So take me through what happened after you came home.
Well, we were sent to some isolated post in New Mexico, and they had a point system for being discharged. You could get a point or various points for various types of medals or decorations you got. You got 1 point for each month of active duty service, and then each month you'd get another point, and the number of points required for discharge would be lowered by a point. And when those two met, you were eligible for discharge. So I was down there probably 2 or 3 months, just waiting for my points to be good. And it was in November of 1945 when I was discharged.
Well, what would they have you do when you were waiting?
I don't recall that we did anything. We were just waiting for the points to be good.
What were your thoughts about the use of the atom bombs?
Well, I was still on active duty when that happened, and I don't recall any particular announcement or anything, but that's just all very vague.
Was it easy for you to readjust to civilian life?
Yes, I didn't have any problem. You felt a little better, a little safer, and I thought we did what we did and what we could, and then we came home.
How badly would your plane get shot up overseas?
Nothing very severely, just a lot of holes that need to be patched. We didn't suffer a lot of damage. That most serious, of course, being the oxygen system being shot out.
How worried were you?
Not very. We had these walk-around bottles, and
How cold was it up there?
oh, it'd be cold, but we had a thermal suit that we put on that you'd plug in, and it was electric, and that would keep us warm.
How far were you able to walk with the plug?
I'm not sure how that worked. It doesn't seem logical that it would be plugged in, and I don't think it was. There may have been just some kind of a control that we had to control the heat. I just don't remember those details.
When you returned home, what was the first thing you ended up doing?
Going back to school at the University of Utah.
What did you study?
Well, I was just doing undergraduate studies. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I took several quarters of French. And then I was called to go on a mission for the church. And ironically, it was back to France. And I felt a lot better about this mission than the last one I was on, where we were dropping bombs.
How'd you meet your wife?
My sister knew her and introduced us, and the rest is history.
Love at first sight?
I must have, because I kept going back.
What are some life lessons that you learned from your time in combat?
Just hope that nobody else has to do it. Just hope that we can solve our problems in a different way. Wars don't solve problems. They just create more problems. It's the failure of diplomacy. So we're not very successful in trying to avoid conflict. It's been with us ever since World War II. We're in the midst of it now, again, still.
What do you want to say to all those who died in the Second World War?
I have a great deal of respect for those who gave their lives, who made the sacrifice that made it possible for others to survive and to try to solve the problems that lead to this type of conflict. I have a cousin who was in the Pacific. He was just a matter of a few days younger than I am. And he was killed in the closing days of the war in the Pacific.
What was that like for you when you heard out about that?
Well, just very sad. He lived in a different place, so I didn't see him all that often, but we were so close in age that it had a sad effect on me.
The guys who were shot down overseas with you, did you know them?
We lost one crew out of our hut. It was a day we didn't fly, but this crew was flying and they got shot down.
What do you remember about them?
All I remember is people coming and gathering up their personal effects and shipping them back to where they came from.
If you were to give some life advice to future generations, what would you say?
Learn self-control. Learn to be peaceful. Learn to get along with other people. Learn to have respect for others who may be of a different culture or religion or ethnic background.
And if you were to give me some wisdom for my life, what would you tell me, sir?
Be a decent human being. And you can do that regardless of any other circumstances.
How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I guess from the type of life you lead, each person who knows you has his own take on you, their personality, what you did, what you didn't do. And there are a lot of things we should do and a lot of things we shouldn't do. And getting the proper mix, that determines the type of life we live, and that could be subject to interpretation by...
But what do you want people to think of when they think of you?
Oh, I just hope they'll think I was a good guy. I don't know what to say beyond that. Just being in a small way, being a humanitarian.
Any last words?
Well, I'm just grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my family, as it's continuing to grow. This has been a great source of satisfaction to me, and to see that they're all turning out to be good people. I'm grateful for that.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
You bet.